Hello everyone. So I want to do a video about some articles that have been written about Beto O'Rourke and kind of the speculation that he'll be running in the 2020 primary for the Democrats. It's already looking like the 2020 primary is going to be very nasty, very overcrowded. Um, you know, between people like Bernie potentially running, Elizabeth Warren, now Beto, Joe Biden, um, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. I think those are all very likely people that will run. But it's very hard to know for sure, and we have to kind of speculate at this point. But people are writing articles about these things, kind of from both perspectives, and that's what I want to focus on and give my take on the different sides. And obviously, like I come out more on the progressive leaning side. Um, but more or less, what my goal is personally, I mean, I just want to be objective. I just want to look at Beto's voting record and determine, for one thing, I mean, like I say, I identify more as progressive, so that's what I want to see implemented, and that's what I think objectively gets better results for everyone, basically, so that it's a more humane society that we live in. Um, yeah, so that's what I agree with. And on the other hand, though, I want I want there to be transparency. I want Beto, if he's going to end up running, I don't want him to run as a progressive because I don't think he is a progressive. And it's the common model for presidential runs to basically, if especially for the Democratic side, to run to the left in the primary and then go to the right in the general. And that kind of came out of probably before Bill Clinton even, but Bill Clinton was kind of the first to nail it down, I guess. And this is what Hillary did because Hillary tried to basically outflank Bernie on his left and also at the same time be like, oh, I'm a practical progressive, kind of like how she would put it. And then in the general, I mean, she was pretty much on the going to the right. I mean, on foreign policy, it was not looking good for her, and she was standing. She tried her best to kind of have the point about trade and TPP, but she was not. I'm getting off in the weeds here, but basically, like her voting record, well, not voting record. She wasn't voting on it, but her comments on it were not consistent with what she was saying. So, point being, I mean, this does apply to Beto actually, because Beto. The reason why it's not going to work is because people aren't going to believe him. I think, and also there is another kind of caveat to that where it's like I don't know if maybe people will be fooled by his appearance and the way he's like a smooth talker, and maybe they'll overlook the policy that he's been voting for that's not good, and I'll get into all that. But so I don't know if that will translate into a real base of voters. So to some degree, I think that this is kind of a manufactured debate that we're having, and just people in their establishment circles kind of just to be so crude about it, but they kind of just jerk themselves off about this stuff. They write articles like, "Yeah, Beto's so great," right? It's like, uh, yeah, okay, so he gained some notoriety because he ran against Ted Cruz, but I don't think to just assume people will be okay with him being president. I don't think that's necessarily going to follow, and we have to look at what the polls say. But I still think Bernie is much more ahead, and Biden is more in the lead than Beto. I think that from what I've seen Beto maybe in the lead one or two times, but you know, Biden and Sanders are usually at the top, and with Biden, yeah, I don't know if that's a real base of support either, because it depends on how you do the polls and how you oversample certain generations of people. If you oversample the older generation, excuse me, yeah, then that's gonna yield different results probably than if you polled younger people. They have more support for Bernie. So I want to go through Beto's voting record real quick, um, and then I'm gonna go into some articles, two articles written by David Sirota, who, by the way, I just want to kind of contextualize everything for you. David Sirota is a good journalist, and he also, I found out, used to work for Bernie Sanders. I'm not sure to what capacity specifically, but he did work for Bernie Sanders. And this is kind of like the smear that they bring out. It's like that, oh, he worked for Bernie, so he's biased against Beto. Well, I think people are not having honest conversations about this because you can find bias on both sides. And as I'm going to point out with the article that's critical against Bernie and pro Beto, those people are from establishment circles and they run in more centrist circles. So it's hypocrisy to say like, oh, this is like, I don't know, a journalist activism, but if you're just pointing out facts, and that's the thing is that these two articles by Sirota, that one is an analysis of Beto's voting record, and then the other is an opinion piece basically saying why he thinks that that's wrong, for the Democrats to pursue. Why the Beto model is going to be flawed. He outlines that. So it seems to me that's very transparent. It's a nuanced look at the voting record and then an explanation for why that probably will not work. I mean, it's not even a probably. We already know it didn't work in 2016. That like centrist model, it didn't work. So you're going to try and run that against Trump again. So just ridiculous. So I just want to go through my own kind of breakdown here. And just to start off, like Beto is not even in the Progressive Caucus. So, we want to have a conversation about whether, people are attacking Beto justifiably. If they're just pointing out facts, I mean, he said himself he's not a progressive. He's not in the Progressive Caucus, which nominally is, it's only, progressive by name to a degree because Nancy Pelosi's in it and she's not really progressive when you look at her record too. But he's not even nominally a progressive is the point. He's in the New Democrat coalition, which is, just Clintonian politics. Like, it's unabashedly so. And so he voted to deregulate Wall Street, and specifically the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He voted against protections for it says unlawful discrimination, but that's that's kind of like racial, and obviously that connotation to it is civil rights, racial discrimination. So he voted against having that. Voted to fast track TPP back in 2016, I assume that must have been. So that went against the majority of Democrats, and basically that's him abdicating his responsibility, Congress's responsibility, to regulate trade and just say, okay, Obama, you can do the TPP deal all on your own. So, I mean, very ridiculous. And people, are going to rationalize it and say like, oh, well, if it was the real vote, I would vote against it. It's like a symbolic vote. Well, I've never understood that excuse because like you're either going to be against it or not. Like you're saying you're going to vote for it, but you're not actually for it. Like that's ridiculous. So tweeted support for Israel and AIPAC. He was at AIPAC, and this is problematic because to me it shows he's not committed to dealing with the Israel-Palestine issue in a serious way, and and he's not. He's obviously more in line with trying to just strengthen the Israeli-U.S. alliance, which, as if like you need to affirm that now. It's stronger than ever probably with what Trump's doing with moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Like it's never made sense to me. You need to the whole idea of us being a neutral arbiter is completely gone now. It's not even in the spectrum of debate. So I I think him doing that is very tone deaf for one thing. And then he voted with the fossil fuel industry and takes money from them. And the dodge with this is they um, well he says like I don't take corporate PAC money, which from what I can gather is true, but then you're just not having a nuanced conversation because you have to that's not the end all be all. Yes, not taking corporate PAC money is important. That doesn't mean you can't be. It doesn't mean you. What am I trying to say? It doesn't mean like you can't be corrupted in other ways. You can be corrupted by them by the individuals in these industries. So very simple-minded, basically, and very waffly on Medicare for all. Like he's said, like I support universal coverage or access to health care. They like to say, um, and he's been reluctant to be, uh, at the forefront on this issue and say I support this. So, and actually, best for last here. 30% voting record with Trump, according to 538. 30%. Now, I'm gonna give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt here because let me just say like in terms of policy, I think barely nothing I agree with Trump on. The only things like recently he's said that he wants to take us out of Syria. I agree with that. He wants to limit the number of troops in Afghanistan. I say take them all out, but inching in the right direction, that's fine. I also think that we shouldn't really be escalating tensions with Russia. Trump he might be doing that for the wrong reasons. I'll accept that, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that is the right policy. We shouldn't be escalating with them, and that's not the direction we should be going in. And rhetoric-wise, like Trump's anti-corruption stuff, I agree with. The only problem is he doesn't actually act on policy in that regard. So that's what I agree with. I've laid out basically everything that I agree with Trump on. I don't think we should be at 30% in agreement with Trump. And this is supposedly who our knight in shining armor is going to go against Trump in 2020, according to some people. The 30% Trump. No, I'm not buying that. And this is complete partisan hackery. And it's worse than that because it's just like it's projection because they always accuse the progressives of being like ideologues and like, oh, like you only care about like your precious little ideas and you don't care about facts. Well, actually, the progressives, they look at the objective reality and what the experts say. The fact that we don't have universal healthcare in this country and every other modern country does. It's not a crazy idea, except if you're like a centrist Democrat, it's like, oh, like so pie in the sky, that's ridiculous. And they're the real ideologues because they are latching onto ideas that are proven failures. I mean, especially now. I mean, because centrism, if you want to say it had its day in the 90s, and Bill Clinton was the third way Democrat, yeah, they worked then, but it's a different era now. Like, it's moved on now. Yeah, this just, so I want to get into the actual articles now. I know I've kind of, seems like I've been rambling a lot just already, but not even getting started now. So, consumer protection, this is what I was saying earlier with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So these are going to be the real fine details of what Beto's voting record is. So since its creation in 2010, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, has been under relentless assault by Republicans who have sought to help the financial industry limit its authority. At times, they have found an ally in O'Rourke. In one instance, the Texas Democrat helped the GOP challenge the agency's bulletin, which asserted its authority to pursue auto lenders whose policies harm consumers through unlawful discrimination. Republicans in 2015 introduced legislation that to repeal that directive. Civil rights groups such as the NAACP opposed the GOP measure, and House Democrats said it was designed to halt recent actions to root our discriminatory policies among auto lenders. The Obama White House said it strongly opposed the Republican bill. O'Rourke nonetheless officially co-sponsored the bill and voted for it, echoing the GOP's line of attack on the CFPB. The Democrat faulted the agency for a lack of openness, which he asserted had created uncertainty, criticisms of the CFPB's conclusions, and has made loans more expensive to borrowers. Yeah, and I could go on, but like I think the point is, like, he's siding with business. He's not siding with the consumer, and that's very in line with what the GOP philosophy is, isn't it? It's like you always side with the free market, and the consumers have no protections or certain rights, and it's like, oh, you're making things so bad for businesses. Like, these aren't like small community banks we're talking about. Like, it's such a tired talking point. These are not community banks. These are huge institutions here, and the idea that we even have to have this debate, like people should have rights against discrimination in regards to banks. Yeah, of course. If we didn't have that, black people in the South, they probably have a lot harder time getting loans and things like that. So, just so obvious. So I'll go on to fossil fuels and energy. During his Senate race, O'Rourke was lauded for his rhetoric about the threat of climate change in Congress. He has questioned the safety of natural gas fracking, and he has high ratings from the League of Conservation voters. O'Rourke, however, has also cast key votes with Republicans to boost the fossil fuel industry, whose carbon emissions are at the root of the climate crisis. For instance, O'Rourke was only one of only a handful of House Democrats who voted for Republican bills to lift the 40-year-old oil export ban. During the legislative debate over lifting the ban, the Democrats committee report argued that the extreme approach taken by this bill not only repeals current crude export restrictions, but also ensures that no export restrictions for any reason could be implemented or enforced in the future. The Democratic report added the bill could have potentially vast consequences for consumers, the environment, and climate change. O'Rourke twice voted to lift the ban. At the same time, O'Rourke helped Republicans vote down Democratic legislation to prevent drilling in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and he backed a separate GOP bill to speed up natural gas exports. These are all pretty much votes in favor of the fossil fuel industry, as I was saying. And I guess, like, you could spin it as like it's like trying to be practical, like you need to get, make ends meet basically for everyday people, but it certainly doesn't have any air of like trying to move in the direction of green energy. And it says here, O'Rourke was one of 69 Democrats to support the bill passed to ensure reliable electricity service and reduce the risks of fires and fire hazards caused by inadequate vegetation management in areas where power lines cross federal lands, repeating charges made by Democrats in the bill's committee report. Arizona Democratic Representative Rahul Grijalva said during the floor debate, the bill waives liability for companies that start forest fires or cause other damage. This is nonsense and shifts an incredible burden on and risk onto the American taxpayers. So O'Rourke supported that, and this is in favor of companies instead of people. Another example of in regards to the consumer protection. So you begin to see now. I'll read from one more, Regulating Wall Street, but you begin to see how Beto, is not at all this progressive hero, and he's being lauded as like this big new star. And I think that was mostly just by chance, just because he happened to be in the right Senate race at the right time. So I'll finish up on Regulating Wall Street here. For this article, by the way, we still have way more to go. O'Rourke has a somewhat mixed record on financial issues, according to the watchdog group Americans for Financial Reform. At times, he has voted with Democrats to protect existing regulations. Still, he has also frequently aided the GOP in some of its efforts to deregulate Wall Street. For instance, in 2014 and 2018, O'Rourke cast votes for GOP bills that included provisions weakening the so-called Volcker Rule, which aims to prevent financial firms from using depositors' savings for their own speculative trading. Now that's very interesting, because the Volcker Rule, if I remember correctly, this is kind of like a watered down Glass-Steagall. It's trying to keep depositors' savings away from the financial firms' speculative trading, the investments and risky bets, essentially casino capitalist bets that they make. And so he voted in 2014 and 2018 to weaken that. And then it says in 2017 and 2018, O'Rourke also voted for GOP legislation that Democrats said would empower financial institutions to shield themselves from bank examiners, a package of Republican bills that Democrats said would reduce independent audits of corporations, deregulate stock exchanges and high-frequency trading, a Republican bill to permit larger number of bank holding companies to take on more debt, and a Republican bill that Democrats said would eliminate meaningful clear disclosures to consumers about their privacy rights, including their ability to opt out from having their information sold to unaffiliated third-party companies. So that last part, again in line with consumer protection, siding with the business side and not consumers or the people, you could say. So this is neoliberalism 101 here, and this guy. He might almost be worse than Hillary Clinton in the sense that he's just not very good at hiding his shitty voting record. I think at least with Hillary, there's a little bit of veneer of like she kind of had more recognition before, as first lady, so she kind of had her own persona set up, in her own kind of style, established for her. Not to say that it was popular, but and her voting record's not good either, but it was more or less in line with where people were at the time. It was just not principled, and she was more informed on political issues such as the Iraq War, and she should have understood that was wrong. But point being, this guy is basically going through that Hillary transformation when she was a senator during 9/11. He's going through this transformation now in 2018, and he's still in his centrist phase where he's oh, I think this is the way things should be, and he's the radical positions, they're way too far out, man. No, like you have to actually understand that the way things are now, the establishment is forcing austerity on people essentially, and income inequality, and it's creating this imbalance. To put it simply, um, and he just thinks more of the same is essentially what we need. So David Sirota, again wrote this op-ed, and I just want to read kind of like the latter part of it because I think it makes the one of the good points that I like to focus on in this, like the misguided idea that Democrats need a centrist to win. So he says, one such tactic is hawking their agenda of corporate appeasement as a Democratic Party necessity to attract independent voters in an allegedly conservative country. To win, the party must affirm core American beliefs in free enterprise, individual initiative, and self-reliance, and put strengthening markets' ability to provide broader opportunities before government redistribution, wrote two officials of the Progressive Policy Institute, a deceptively titled think tank for pro-business Democrats. And just pause to take at that name there, Progressive Policy Institute. Like this is very common in politics. People co-opt certain names like progressive, and that's why progressive is practically like lost its meaning now. Like it just doesn't mean full leftist, really. Obviously not. Progressive is practically, it's hardly even center left to me now. But I digress. Those officials' odes to Ayn Rand somehow didn't mention their group's own poll that showed a whopping 3/4 of all Americans say they want to expand Social Security and Medicare. Another 54% say they support Medicare for all, and that included 75% of independent voters. A new poll of Yale University found that 80% of registered voters support a Green New Deal, in which the government takes strong action to fight climate change. Amid this shift in public opinion, environmental, labor, and economic justice movements now threaten to take over the Democratic Party. And so another tactic of the status quo crowd has been I don't know what that word is. I'm not even going to pronounce it or even attempt to. So the status quo crowd has demands for comity. COMITY. These are some interesting words. This rhetorical maneuver was best summarized by a recent Boston Globe editorial deriding firebrand Senator Elizabeth Warren. The screed decried the outspoken Wall Street critic as too divisive for the presidency and called instead for a unifying voice. Oh God. like Elizabeth Warren is basically like watered down Bernie Sanders, so it's like damn, like that's too divisive for you. Wow. But then Obama provided exactly that for 8 years as president, and his conflict-averse program nonetheless left us with a country that is now more oligarchy than democracy. Another blank slate Democrat who pretends there is a unifying third way between the 99% and the 1%, and who refuses to take sides in big fights against corporate power. That may excite Beto maniacs, establishment Democrats, and those with the stakes in the status quo, but it won't rescue our country and it won't save the planet. And I think that's exactly correct. And I think, even though he didn't quite say it specifically, like, it's not going to energize our country. It's not going to get people excited because, look, if Hillary Clinton couldn't do that with that model, Beto is not going to do it, I don't think. Beto is just kind of a nobody. He just kind of came out of nowhere. He has some charisma, yeah. It's like, is that our low bar now? You just need a little bit of charisma and be able to talk well in order to be president? Like, is this what we're at now? I think it's just a trend thing. It's whatever the hottest story is. And, he might run, he might not run. I tend to think he probably will, because he probably understands that he kind of has a real chance because of trying to just like pick up this momentum where he left off with the Senate race. Um, but at the end of the day, like I don't think it's going to be enough to put him over the top, and especially depending on how he runs his campaign, like it's just not, it seems very tense to me, and a lot like the predicament between Hillary and Bernie. So definitely cause for concern to me. So last thing, definite last thing I want to do here is go over this NBC article entitled "Inside Bernie World's War on Beto O'Rourke." Now, firstly, like I alluded to earlier, the authors of this article, one of them is a former staffer of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and I probably don't have to go into who she is, like kind of a key player on the Democratic side for the 2016 election. She was the DNC chair, and then another is a staffer for a centrist think tank. So these people are in their own bubbles, whatever. It's like, if you want to say the progressives are in a bubble, I guess, sure. We're in our group where we understand what we believe and we want to fight for these things. Yeah, okay, and we want to convince other people. But the centrists, I feel like they just kind of want to trick you. They want to trick you into falling for their schemes. But point being, they have their ideology that they're pushing for. Progressives have theirs, and this is what they have to say. So I feel like I'm giving it really a fair assessment, because I'm going to give both sides here, and a side that's more critical of Bernie, and we'll just see how I react to it, basically. The article is not too long, so hopefully I can get through the whole thing. So, forces loyal to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders are waging an increasingly public war against Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke, the new darling of Democratic activists, as the two men weigh whether to seek the party's presidential nomination in 2020. The main line of attack against Beto O'Rourke is that he isn't progressive enough, that he's been too close to Republicans in Congress, too close to corporate donors, and not willing enough to use his star power to help fellow Democrats. And it is being pushed almost exclusively by Sanders supporters online and in print. It's been the first flashpoint in what promises to be a politically bloody primary, one that has drawn responses from foot soldiers in the Obama and Clinton wings of the party, as Democrats begin to focus on who has the best chance to deny President Donald Trump a second term in the Oval Office. Nomiki Konst, a progressive activist and 2016 Sanders supporter who is now running for public advocate in New York City, said liberal activists mostly kept quiet about their concerns over O'Rourke's record, including the backing he got from centrist Blue Dog Democrats before he lost a Texas Senate race in November to Ted Cruz. They sucked it up while he was running because they wanted him to win, Kant said, but now it's a different story. Which is, of course, true. Just to pause again, like, this is, it should be quite obvious, like I pointed out before, like, going between a Texas Senate race, Texas is pretty deeply red, having almost any other Democrat in there would be better. But compare that to a presidential race, that it's a much different dynamic, and I don't think like a blue dog Democrat should be anywhere near the presidency. Let me put it that way. So the biggest difference may be that O'Rourke is now a threat to Sanders in the 2020 primary. Though neither man has announced whether he will run, O'Rourke captured the hearts and dollars of veteran Democrat activists, donors of all ages, and millennial political newcomers across Texas and the nation in his Senate run. I think this week can be understood as a kind of turning point where, for the first time really, millions of Americans are seeing pieces that look underneath the superficial gloss of projections onto Beto, said Norman Solomon, who was the delegate for Sanders at the 2016 Democratic National Convention. What we're seeing is someone who's a big step up for a red state, Texas statewide, and actually a big step down for where the majority of Democrats are nationwide. If we buy the Beto package, we're going to have buyer's remorse later on. O'Rourke's narrow defeat, he lost by 2.6 points in a state that hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate since Lloyd Benson 30 years ago, instantly propelled him into the national conversation about Democratic presidential hopefuls. For many Democrats, the nascent fight is counterproductive because it distracts from the positive messages of both potential candidates, including Sanders, O'Rourke, Senators Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker. It's like they had to like throw them in there as if it's like it's not even what they're talking about. and you know, just to address that because they brought it up, like, where is the grassroots support for Kamala Harris and Cory Booker? Like, does anyone actually like talk about the people's like, oh yeah, like I think they'd be great presidents? Like, and maybe I just don't hang out with these people. Like, I don't know. Like, I have to assume there's some, but do they really? It just seems like to me, the mainstream media, like, they push that more than how average everyday people talk about these things. And I think most people put Bernie up at the top. It just seems to be that way, and Beto is just drawing some more eyeballs at this point. But so I'll go on. I don't think there's much appetite among Democratic voters to relive some of the dumb Twitter fights that we saw in the 2016 primary, said John Fervar, a former speechwriter for President Barack Obama. There are plenty of progressives who might run from Beto and Bernie to Kamala and Booker and others, and I think it's more productive to focus our time and energy talking about why we support the candidates who inspire us. So, again, I keep having to pause because I can't let stuff like this slide. Like, he's literally saying, like, I mean, obviously not literally saying this, but the implication is like, oh, like it's all the same. There's plenty of progressives running, Beto, Bernie, Kamala, as if they're all just the same, which is not correct. Kamala Harris, okay, she refused to prosecute Steve Mnuchin when she was, I believe, a prosecutor in Florida. It was, and I believe the bank was either called Key West or One West Bank, and Steve Mnuchin was foreclosing on grandmas and grandpas, people who have, no means after the recession, and they have nothing, and they're foreclosing them and like screwing them over. And Kamala Harris's office recommended that she prosecute him, and she didn't. She is a neoliberal centrist, and so is Cory Booker, through and through. So saying these names as if they're like all just the same thing, and we could all just decide over that, like, no, like, we have to have an honest discussion about who everyone is and who they stand for, and who we should stand for as a party. And this is a frustration I have with the Democrats, is like they have this big tent mentality where it's like we can all just kind of agree to disagree. Well, look, we can have a conversation about lesser evilism, sure. I agree with that. But at the end of the day, we have to have a conversation about what the Democratic Party stands for. We can't just be like, oh, we are the centrists and the progressives too. No, I think we need a strong message to push forward, and we're going to get more people to support Democrats that way. So let me continue. And I'm sorry, just the inspire us thing at the end. Like, this is devoid of policy. That's the whole point. It is that we're not having a conversation about policy. We're just like, oh, the appearance of it is inspiring and it's uplifting. Like, that's what I care about. No, I care about policy. I don't care about appearance. Bernie Sanders is up there with like a freaking hunchback and his hair looks like he went through a wind tunnel. Like, I don't care about that. I care about what he talks about. So I just wanted to point that out. But O'Rourke's ability to connect with younger and progressive white voters, Sanders' source of strength in his losing 2016 primary against Hillary Clinton, puts him in direct competition with the Vermont senator. And just to quick pause again, the polls show that that's not correct. He has a stronger standing with minorities than he does white people. That's just the truth. But it says here, a Quinnipiac University poll released December 19th showed that 57% of voters between the ages of 18 and 34 have a favorable view of Sanders, while his unfavorable ratings are higher than his favorables with voters 35 and older. 25% of millennials view O'Rourke favorably, with 15% viewing him unfavorably. 59% telling Quinnipiac they haven't heard enough about him to know how they feel. And while the vast majority of Democrats have an opinion about Sanders, that's not true of O'Rourke yet, with 51% reporting they don't have enough information to report or form an opinion on. That explains the rush to define him in negative terms. Sanders supporters insist there's nothing coordinated about the attacks on O'Rourke, and note Sanders himself and his top allies have said nothing about O'Rourke. Sanders is an unusually decentralized political world. This thing is just written so grammatically weird. Oh my gosh. With a loose collection of activists and operatives who often take actions without direction or approval from any central authority, but they acknowledge that there's increasing public examination of his work. It started with David Sirota, a liberal activist and journalist who worked for Sanders many years ago. In a long tweet storm, Sirota noted that O'Rourke had received many donations from the oil and gas industry than any candidate in the 2018 cycle other than Cruz. The missing context: O'Rourke didn't take money from corporate political action committees, and the donations attributed to the oil and gas business include both a handful from executives and many other from lower-level employees of his home state's flagship industry. Altogether, they still account for a little more than half of 1% of all of the money he raised for the election. So they're trying to nuance troll here and say, well, some of these donations came from lower-level employees, but the executives too, and he didn't take corporate PAC money. Well, you're taking money from the executives. That's strike one, you're out to me. Like, I'm sorry. Like, we're talking about the oil and gas industry here, and we need to remove their influence from our political system. Full stop. So this is still a problem. Like the fact he's obviously, even if you want to say the lower level employees, like he's more beholden to this industry than green technology, and that's important. That is political, and it will have implications on not just our country but the entire world. And I think it's an important conversation to have. So money matters. It matters where it comes from, no matter what, really. And you have to understand that it's going to establish a connection that basically entails that, like, your loyalty is more to that money than the people who don't give you money. Like, it should be a pretty straightforward dynamic. So a supporter of Bernie Sanders attacking a Democrat tweeted near Tannen, president of the Center for American Progress and a former aide to both Hillary Clinton and Obama, this is seriously dangerous. That earned her a spat of online rebukes. Earlier this week, Sorta posted an article on the website Capital in Maine calling into question O'Rourke's votes against the Democratic position during his tenure in the House, but his variance is less than that of the average member of the party. Well, that's just a lie. I've already outlined like the average member. So the average member of the Democrats is 30% with Trump. Then I guess like I don't think that number is true. I don't think that's true at all. There's people that vote more than 30% with Trump, sure. Um, and even if that was the case, like that doesn't make it a good thing. The fact that like if you want to say 30% is the acceptable threshold for you to vote for Trump, like I'm not going to agree to that. Um, Chris Evans, a spokesman for O'Rourke, declined to comment for the story, but O'Rourke, who aggressively sought to defy being labeled during this Texas Senate campaign, can point to positions he's taken that are popular with progressives, including impeaching Donald Trump and legalizing marijuana at the federal level. Wow, so you threw us those bones. Great for you. Melissa Brine, who worked on Sanders' 2016 campaign and supports him in 2020, said she hopes O'Rourke will run against Texas Senator John Cornyn instead of seeking the presidency. I'm not afraid of Beto, she said. I'm afraid of people taking a centrist to conservative, making that the face of what it means to be a progressive. Some Democrats say the Sanders troops are doing a disservice to their cause, pointing to the failure of candidates from Our Revolution, the political group formed in the wake of his presidential campaign to win general elections in 2018 by creating a fight with O'Rourke. That is false. Our Revolution, I don't know the exact numbers, but Our Revolution, to say that was a failure to win general elections in 2018, that's false. That they did win elections, in quite a number of them. One of them was a governorship in Wisconsin, I believe, and the Republicans they freaked out about this and like completely went like balls to the wall, basically, like before the new government becomes inaugurated, to limit the power of the governor in Wisconsin. And that's one example. There's plenty. You can go on the website and look. There's plenty of people that won. 7 Justice Democrats won in Congress. So that right there was just trying to poo-poo the left's resurgence right now. How much of more of this? Like, oh my god, just a little bit more. Okay. Telling people that Beto O'Rourke is a moderate candidate is not going to do the damage that it would have before, said one party elder who is not aligned with any of the candidates. They will strengthen him. They will make him into a bigger force than he is. Based on what? Based on what? Who is looking for this moderate savior in the Democratic Party? That's not what the polls are showing. Beyond the strategic wisdom of taking on O'Rourke for Sanders, the prospects of an ugly fight that could harm the party over the long term are unappealing to some Democrats. And yes, I agree with that sentiment, but that doesn't mean that we should just bend over backwards and say that O'Rourke is progressive, and it's like like we shouldn't objectively call out his record as being in favor of the Republicans, like at least a certain number of the time. So there are going to be 2 ways for candidates to run their primary campaigns. One is to sharpen the contrast against Trump without cannibalizing the other Democratic candidates, and the other is to run a scorched earth campaign against the other Democrats, claiming you're the only true progressive in the field, said Ben LaBolt, who was a White House and campaign aide to Obama. Democrats should be wary to keep their eye on the prize and avoid fueling the next Jill Stein boomlet or otherwise depressing Democratic turnout in the general election. So basically, don't reveal all this stuff about Beto because we don't want people to know that he sucks and you shouldn't vote for him, is what that was. But Kant said it makes sense that progressives are vetting O'Rourke now that he is being mentioned as a possible presidential candidate. It's important, she said, to make a distinction between the cool image he's crafted with progressives, in part by giving them a window into his daily routine with frequent live stream episodes and what really matters to them. Reading Karl Marx is cool, she said. Doing a live stream while you're doing your laundry is a gimmick. And, whatever. That's like the typical left there. Reading Karl Marx, yeah, we gotcha. You're like a socialist or whatever. That's wrong. Like, stuff is so old, and so now that I've gone through all this stuff pretty much with a fine-tooth comb, like this whole Beto mania stuff is just so propped up to me, and to the degree that he has this following, I think what we have to do is just point out his record, very adamantly so, and not get bogged down in all the different talking points that they'll throw at us, and they will inevitably do that. And I tried to kind of go through some of that in this list, this presentation, this video that I'm making for you, and hopefully, we're not gonna have a repeat of the 2016 election, and we won't have selective memory, and we'll be able to pick up on these points of attack that they're going to put on us, and we will know just how to tell them that Beto is not the right candidate for the job. And it is possible that he could steal it out from under Bernie, just like Hillary did. But all we can do, I think, is just try and basically uncover the objective reality, and go out and vote in the primary, because I don't want people to get discouraged.